Welcome, everybody, to episode 1 of The Musician's Musician. I'm your host, Nick Costa, and for those who don't know the concept here, I ask musicians I love to pick a musician that they love and an album that they love, and we just nerd out for a bit. Today, I talked with Kristopher Roe, who you might know as the frontman / lead singer / songwriter / main guy in general for the legendary pop-punk band The Ataris. I grew up listening to the Ataris. I actually joined my first band ever in 8th grade because a kid in my Spanish class saw my Converse All-Stars with flames on them and asked, "Do you like Sum 41?" And I said, "Yes." And then he said, "Do you like the Ataris?" And I pulled out my Discman and I showed him my copy of Blue Skies, Broken Hearts, Next 12 Exits. And then he asked if I played drums, and I just said yes, but I would have to use his kit. And that's a whole different story. Kristopher chose to talk about the Weakerthans and especially focus on the album Reconstruction Site. In this talk, we dive into the album, but we get sidetracked often. We dig pretty deep into his songwriting process. He shares some of his lyrics from the next couple of Ataris releases. We talk about the history of his music fandom. He was just so generous with his time. I could release an entire second part of this podcast just with the stuff I cut out. It was such a pleasure to chat with Kristopher, and I hope you enjoy it as well. Let's get into it. Great. Well, I am here with Kristopher Roe of the Ataris. Kristopher, thank you for being a musician's musician.
Very honored. This is a podcast that I feel is kind of built for me, being the big music nerd guy that I am. So I'm part of it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, it's one for us. So
yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to get into your pick. But before I get into that, you are doing some new music.
That's right. I've been recording. I'm sorry. I spoke over you. What'd you say?
No, yeah, I was going to say the Ataris are
correct.
Back.
Yeah. The way the Ataris always worked generally in the studio was me and a drummer. So like the Ataris it's basically whatever I choose to record. It's like I put that name on it. But yeah, it's new Ataris music, correct? And so been in the studio recording new music for a while now, but I think it was basically in the last year or so that I feel like I just kind of got over this hump and like recorded a couple new songs. And it was like, oh, I can do this. Like, I remember how to do this. Like, I don't know what just kind of clicked, but then from there, it just sort of steamrolled. And I've been in the studio every month. I just booked 3 more months of studio time. When I say month, like a couple weeks per month, I'm just like, just recording and documenting like any and every song that I have, in my kind of like, I keep a playlist on my computer of like, all kinds of random fragmented ideas from dating as far back as the 90s to things I've written currently. And there's just finally came to a time where I feel like I'm making some great progress and I actually see like a kind of finish line in sight. So right now, and I hate putting dates on things, but right now I've kind of set a bar for myself where I've got studio time booked in January, February, and March. And the way it looks right now, as far as like the actual new recording of things, I'll probably finish with the recording in March. It might carry over to one more session in April because I'm still recording a lot of like new things.
Yeah. And
there will be a point where I'm like, okay, I've documented and recorded everything that I have that I want to record, like with the skeleton of each song, meaning like the drums and basic rhythm and bass. And then I will start going back to everything I've recorded recently and start, adding all the other bits and pieces and finishing them. I do have some complete finished songs. We will be releasing a 7-inch with 2 of those songs. Well, 1 new song and then 1 surprise thing in the new year. I can't say when yet, but yeah, right early part of next year. And it's really special. I mentioned it one time on another podcast I did. It's really special because my dad, he was the biggest supporter of the band and always of my music and what I would create. and he passed away like 10 years ago this coming year. Thank you.
Yeah.
And to celebrate him, I always had this idea that like, what a cooler way to celebrate him than to like make him a physical part of the music. I looked up, there really hadn't been any band that did this. I had seen a website where you could, for your family, make a small pressing of a vinyl with the ashes of someone in the vinyl.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, you know what? I would like to do that, but do it for our fans. The ones who knew him, he used to be on our message board. He would he would copy tapes, like VHS tapes of our shows and send them to fans. So I was like, I'm going to look into that. We found a company in Canada that would do it. We're going to do a small pressing, but one step further, we're going to get all the proceeds of the Ashes variant are going to go to a charity that will help kids that grow up in families that are affected by addiction and alcoholism, because he died of renal failure that was related to his alcoholism. He got sober later in life and became a really wonderful human. But when I was young, he was an alcoholic, and well, he was an alcoholic his whole life, but he got sober and yeah, so that's the first thing we'll be releasing, and hopefully by the end of March, I'll have an idea of where I'm at with all the other recording. And it looks like at this point, I have 2 to 3 records full of material, whether or not,
wow.
What I'll do. I mean, I've recorded about 20 songs already. Some of those have vocals. Some of them don't have lyrics. I'm going to use a handful of those. That was like the first session for what we were calling the Graveyard of the Atlantic, which I'm probably not even going to use that title anymore because I've grown past it. And then recently I've recorded a bunch more songs, and in the next 3 sessions, I intend to record more. So I'll probably end up taking like 12 of what I feel are the strongest that I really want to be on a record, put those on a record, and then I'll have a bunch of other things that I will use for something the next record or some 7 inches. I don't know. But right now, the goal is hopefully finish recording in March, and then from there, I'll, start mixing and things like that. But I don't know. We'll see.
Well, that's very exciting, though.
Thank you.
Especially that it's so much music. Fans of yours, myself included, are going to be very excited. And you're doing that with Bob Hogue, right?
Yeah, Bob Hogue runs the studio in Arizona called Flying Blanket, and it's a really cool place because it's kind of like, speaking of like musicians, it's like a place that's like a very niche recording place. Like I know you were a fan of that band Margo in Indiana, but I think one of those guys, maybe because he was friends with their old bass player Brian, or some of those guys were, and I think they own a studio. They're the guys who run the studio that's in an old post office in Indiana, right?
Yes. Yep.
We rehearsed there once, and I love that studio. So there's some other studios like that are predominantly analog, and they're built in cool spaces. There's like Sonic Ranch in Texas. There's Jack White's studio, Third Man. Yep. Well, Flying Blanket is very much that kind of vibe, where it's built in this cool old mid-century modern style house space. And it's all, old Neve console that used to be in the studio Fort Apache in Boston, where Pinkerton was recorded on that board. The Benz was mixed on that board. Julian Hatfield, Lemonheads, the Pixies. There's so many great records on that board. When the studio Fort Apache closed and those guys, Coldry and Slade, went and made their own home studios, they sold that Neve to my buddy Bob. And so that's the studio Flying Blanket is like just all 50s, 60s, and 70s analog gear, 2-inch tape. And that's how I've always recorded pretty much every Ataris record, is all analog. Yeah. And yeah, I just like the warmth of that feeling of like kind of natural, honest mistakes. I mean, we've talked about the Replacements a little, but that was like, I had this funny story about Paul Westerberg, because I chose to do Solo Astoria with Lou Giordano because he did Paul Westerberg's his solo album Eventually, I believe. And so he told me a story about Paul and how when he went to lunch one time, they had recorded something, and then Paul went to lunch, and he came back, and he was playing back the song they recorded, and he goes, "Hey, play it again." And he goes, "What happened to that mistake that was there?" And Lou goes, "I fixed it." He like cut the tape and fixed the mistake. He goes, "We made our whole career in those fucking mistakes. Put it back how it was." And he made him fix the splice, the edit in the tape. So to me, that is kind of like my mentality for recording. Like that, honesty, that sort of like natural feeling of like that realness of recording that way is why I do it. But I'm not telling anybody to do it some way. You know, I wouldn't buy a Kemper if you made me, but I have no disrespect for those things. Just like I love the warmth of tubes, and that's just how I've always done things. Doesn't make it better; it just makes it how I do it. But
I mean, if I had the ability to, you know, record analog to tape, I feel like there is a lot of honesty in like the performance aspect of the recording that can really come through. I've driven people pretty crazy in the past because it's just like, no, I got it pretty good in 2 takes. I feel good about that one. They're like, well, you could like splice it or something. I'm like, it's fine.
I'm very OCD, so trust me. I mean, even doing it the way I do it, I will just be like the guy where I'll be like, oh, I don't know, man, I could do a better way. And Bob's like, no, it's great. I'm like, and we always end up being like, oh, there was just a certain feeling to like the second take, and it's just like it always seems like he knows me well enough, like my other set of ears, where he'll be like, trust me. So I just kind of, as I've gotten older, I've gotten a little bit better about just like giving up that control and just being like better about. There was a reason he and I work together. He plays drums on all the recordings, and I play all the guitars, the bass, and everything else. And he's just a monster musician, and he plays like an old style drummer. He's more of those. He played drums in this band called Pollen that were like more of a band. That were kind of like all the Descendants. In fact, they were one of the first bands to record at the Blasting Room, the Descendants studio, and they toured with them on the Everything Sucks album. But it was like, I think besides the Descendants, Pollen were the second band to record there. So if you're a fan of Pollen were very much like that. So Bob wrote all those songs, all the 90% of the melodies, the lyrics, everything, but he only played drums. And he would write all the guitar parts, transpose them from piano, left guitar, right guitar to the guitar players. And be like, all right, here's this. And so I always just thought he was really brilliant in that way. And so when we worked together, I mean, we all we're big nerds for Dinosaur Jr. and Sonic Youth and all these bands like that. But, we also grew up with punk rock. And so his style of drumming is more of that shuffly, like Keith Moon, like Mitch Mitchell, Ginger Baker, kind of, like very shuffly thing. And I like that because to me, like one of the biggest things I hate about modern punk rock, it just got it's so, and the cookie cutter thing. It's like,
it's like sample replace drums that are hit as hard as you possibly can.
No dynamic.
And like, I don't know, the thing that drew me to punk rock as a kid was like the honesty behind it.
Me too.
And, like the honest, and like I even feel like I have Endless Forever in the background here. I feel like that record, it sounds so good, but also just like so honest. And same with like, So Long Astoria, and So Long Astoria sounds, I actually was really surprised that was done analog, because
that was
so good.
That was one where I believe we did some of the guitars and stuff to Pro Tools, but just for sake of the second studio we moved at for time, we were in like the B room or something, and but the drums and everything, we started out doing all to tape, and we still kept that like kind of the same. I always had the same kind of like, no matter how I'd record, I would always kind of do it the same way, regardless of the medium I'm recording on. Just like if I'm shooting a photo, it's like still me in my weird, quirky OCD ways. It's like, okay, it's got to be like this, but I'm not going to let them auto-tune anything or really, cut something apart. And we try to keep it real. But thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I could talk about the Ataris all day, but that's not why we're here.
Yes, right.
Let's get into your pick, which is the Weakerthans, is what we're going to be talking about. So we'll get into the album Reconstruction Site as well, but let's just talk about the Weakerthans just as a whole. When did you? This is one thing I'm kind of asking everybody, but when did you first discover? Do you have do you remember the first time you heard the Weakerthans and were like, holy shit?
Yeah, I remember being really, I mean, going back further, I was probably like 14, 15, and I remember me and my friend Mike Branch, who also named the Ataris, we drove 5 hours to St. Louis to see Propaganda play this really tiny venue called the High Point, and they didn't even they had one. Yeah, I think they had that one record out. Yeah, then they had a 10-inch EP as well, the How to Clean Everything, and then they had the one EP. And so John K. Sampson from the Weakerthans was a bass player in that band, which is, when you listen to the Weakerthans, it's such a wild departure to have this like very soft spoken, beautifully poetic writer who was in this, really brilliant in their own right, activist punk rock band that were also, big fans of like Corrosion Conformity and like Venom and hardcore and metal bands. Yeah. So, but I love all that. I came from the world where I loved Slayer, Rain and Blood, but I also loved Motown and jazz. And so I think that for me always shines in the music that speaks to me is you can hear that an artist or a writer has a very vast taste in what they listen to. And I think for me as a writer, it always makes my writing better to have a broader palette. But yeah, so for the Weakerthans, I think the first time I heard them, I forgot who it was, but some kid I knew, I had a like advanced cassette of their first album. I think it was Fallow, which I like that album, all right. But I feel like they really came into their own on Left and Leaving. It was like Fallow was like, all right, this is cool, but it's also like it didn't really strike me as much. But I remember on that album, he did like re-recorded versions of two songs that he did in Propaganda, and I felt like, oh, these make more sense. The song Anchorless, the version he recorded in the Weakerthans, I'm like, this is how this song with these tones, this makes sense. And it made me realize like, oh, this guy is just a really great songwriter in his own right. But it wasn't until Left and Leaving came out where I was like, man, like his lyrics, they're just really in a league of their own. Like to me, there were a handful of these writers that we briefly spoke about in email, like, Blake from Jawbreaker is always one, like when you listen to 24-Hour Revenge Therapy or Dear You, and you just hear how poetic the lyrics are. In that world of music at that time, there weren't a lot of other artists that were really writing like that. Yeah, and that's kind of what spoke to me. And then you had Pedro the Lion, like David Bazan, like Tim Kasher from Cursive and The Good Life. Yep. Like I think that first and second Rilo Kiley album, the lyrics were really incredible. There's like a handful of those. But yeah, it was really cool. And I think, and then when Reconstruction Site came out, it was like, holy hell, this album is like one of the most like albums written albums I've heard in like modern music, as far as like lyrically, like specifically. It's a great album when you put it on, and I don't skip a track. But from a lyrical standpoint, it's like such a high bar that like I love when I hear an album and I'm just like, I quit. Fuck. There are those albums that come along where I'm just like, man, like I love this so much I hate it, because it just makes me frustrated that I am like, I feel like it pushes me to write better, and it makes me feel like, how can I write something of that caliber? And that's what good art does. I think it makes you feel like, all right, I've got to go back to the drawing board and just like continue to push myself harder. Like what I do, I feel I'm proud of, but we can always continue to like better ourselves in our craft. And I mean, if you're not continuing to grow and get better, sorry, I got a low battery mode. There you go. Oh, did it. There it goes. But if you're not continuing to grow and get better and push yourself to be a better writer, guitar player, or whatever, and you plateau and you're not growing, you're just doing the same thing over and over again. To me, that's like, that's one of the bigger travesties for musicians. I like when somebody continues to create, and they have a great sound, and they do that thing. But it's also cool to see those artists that, go from writing like the Blue album to writing Pinkerton, or writing like, OK Computer, and then continuing to like writing In Rainbows. And then like every album, it's like, holy hell, this band continues reinventing the wheel. Like there would be no Dark Side of the Moon if that band did not go from, we're going to continue to evolve. But But yeah, the Weakerthans were a band, and then then they put out one other record after that, and then they decided to just not play anymore, or go on hiatus, and I think that's even more brilliant. But I think you'll talk to a lot of, at least I know, a lot of bands that I know that like, if you mention this record, there's a lot of people that won't even never heard of this band, or they haven't heard of this record, and I'm like, have to listen to this record, especially if you're a songwriter, because it's really a high bar for
Yeah, John K. Sampson, who is the kind of main writer for the Weakerthans, and an incredible solo artist in his own right.
Yeah,
He has a real knack for kind of blending like intense poetic imagery with like kind of plain speak. So it's like
yes,
it's so approachable, and it's so it has a way of just like gutting you in a way where you're just like, I have never been in this situation personally, but I feel it to my core.
yeah.
Um,
When I was listening earlier, I think like you nailed it when you were talking about like plain speak. The one thing that I really feel when I listen to a lot of the songs, and when I was going through some of the lyrics of like Reconstruction Site and Left and Leaving album, he has this way of taking really mundane objects and somehow making them like this eloquent, like vivid image in a song. Like
yeah.
the song, there's a several. I'll mention it, like a few, like oh my goodness, the song "Utilities," which was he. There's this really great solo version he did on like Canadian broadcasting that I remember I like ripped from YouTube and I listened to it
Yes.
forever. And then and because I heard him play it live when I saw them play at the Garage Shop in Cleveland, and then he recorded it for the album. But I just feel there was a certain integrity to that like solo version he did. But the whole song is basically him just like name checking, like the feeling. It's really hard for me to like break apart somebody else's song because I
Mm-hmm.
don't. I'm only going with my interpretation. But like
Right.
it feels like a very melancholy thing of like that feeling. Like the first line is like, I got this feeling that today doesn't like me, and it's like you get this like imagery, like you said in the scene of like the feeling he's going through. But then he goes on and he just talks about all these objects, like really, really minimalist objects. Like, one line is like, we can wish on the pop of a light bulb, or these photos lying yellowed and curled, loose in boxes near abandoned electronics in the corners of the basements of the world. It's like having you take these little scenes and somehow make it do something that like makes the hair on my arm stand up.
Yeah, it's such a unique voice too. Like
Yes.
not like an actual singing voice. Like his singing voice
No,
is very unique, but like
100%. Yeah.
his tone in his writing, you can hear a John K. Sampson lyric and kind of, if you're familiar enough with him, know that that's from him. You
Yeah,
know,
it's
like
very telltale, and,
yeah.
and 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 like you said, his voice. I mean, his actual voice too. It's
Mhm.
it's. I tend to gravitate towards those artists that have kind of character voices or don't sound like anyone else. I mean, if you go
Yeah.
back through even punk rock, or you go through like people who are actual like more well versed singers, I suppose. The ones that stand out for me are not those ones that can actually just like sing perfectly. It's the ones that sound like themselves, like there's one of you. And
Yes.
this is for me one of the things that made me, when I first heard this band, I was like, he's got this. It's almost a very like ornate kind of like. I don't want to say something that sounds like a diss, but it's not. I mean, he's got this very almost kind of flawed voice, and in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
best ways. And I think that's what's great to me about so many singers. Like if you listen to Jay Mascis and Dinosaur Jr., I don't think you ever hear anybody say, "Man, he's the greatest singer." He sounds like no one else, and he's got this very like mumbly, and that's Jay. But it's
Hmm.
fucking awesome, and it's perfect, and it fits for that band. And there's no one like it. And that's what I
No.
feel. This band was really cool. The Weakerthans were cool, and John K. Sampson's voice is great because it's like it's one of a kind, and that's
Agreed.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. I remember it was like a Hopelessly Devoted to You
Oh, there's compilation.
compilation,
Yeah, yeah.
and a side was on there.
I love that song. Great song.
Which is like just an unreal song. But I remember being, like a teenager, and I got that, because I think probably like Thrice, and there's a couple of those bands were on there, and I was like, yeah, I've been to Warped Tour, and I remember hearing that song and being like, I don't know actually what to think about this because this feels different. Like it belongs, but it also stands like away from kind of everything else there. And that
Yeah,
whole album kind of has that vibe. Um,
think that was what was cool about like compilations like that in general is like, there would sometimes be these gateway artists for people. And I had that in my own, going back, I remember there were bands where I would see them wear a t-shirt of an artist and I'd be like, oh, I'm going to check that out. But
Yep.
there were definitely compilations that I would buy. I think my first punk rock album I ever bought was the artist Pusshead, who would draw, all the like Zorlak skateboard shirts for like Metallica and all the like really great artists. And he played in like this kind of like crust hardcore band as well called Septic Death. And he did this compilation called Cleanse the Bacteria, which had like 7 seconds and Poison Idea. And then a bunch of like European bands. And I remember getting this at like 11. I bought it because I remember I loved that artist's art. And I was like, wow, the picture had this guy like in like a swamp with a bunch of sewage, and it was like this weird creature, and it had I like this typical Zorlak. If you don't know what Zorlak is, it's Zorlac for people that would see this. It's he did all that really great art for all those old 80s skateboard decks, and also for Metallica and some other artists. And but yeah, I bought that compilation, and then I discovered that was kind of my gateway into punk rock. And then through that, I remember trading my mom's cordless telephone while she was sleeping for very unbeknownst to her, for a Black Flag cassette of the first 4 years era, and a Minor Threat Out of Step cassette. And she woke up and she's like, Chris, where's my telephone? And I was like, oh shit. And I felt so bad, but I was also like, thanks. She was pretty understanding. But yeah, that's those comps, hopelessly devoted. Yeah, Hopeless were good at, I think they were one of those labels, like be it Epitaph or some other labels like that were good about having some artists that weren't just in that punk rock box. And you had some that had that niche sound. Like I think if you think of Fat, they definitely had a thing. But Epitaph, they went on and they started Anti, and they had signed like Tom Waits, and then they signed the Weakerthans too. They put out their records later. Yep. But I like when these punk rock labels, obviously they have people that are there, like probably Brett from Bad Religion, that have this taste like you and I, that it's beyond that, and they want to give a window to those artists. So yeah, I think Lucero are one I always think of too, because they were on like a Warped Tour comp and some other things, and I loved that band for ages. And then I remember that was kind of the thing. I think that song Bike Riders was on a comp, and I was like, man, good for them. Like it just kind of what they'd already built just like steamrolled. I think that was a big compilations helped. San Dimas was on the Fat Records comp, and that was the thing that launched our band. I mean, we already had a record out. Nobody knew who the hell we were. And then we were out playing shows. And during that tour, I remember we'd suddenly see people. We started the tour playing for 5 people. And then we played a few shows on the Fat Records tour with like, I forgot, he was Good Riddance and we no use for name. And there'd be like, oh, we played San Dimas, and we'd notice people know the words. Like, how do they know the words? I'm like, oh, it's that Fat Music comp that they give out with mail order for free. And then when we put out Blue Skies the following year, that was in the fall, and the San Dimas was on that comp. And the following year, that was the thing that kind of launched the Blue Skies album. But anyway, back to the Weakerthans. Yes, I like to give long diatribe answers. I'm so sorry.
No. That's why this is a podcast.
Oh, by the way, I'm going to plug in the battery to this.
Take your time.
I have an external battery. So I give my phone a little more juice.
That's
great. In fact, it's in the other room, so apologies. I'm gonna
no. Take your time.
Pause for 1 second.
I'll snip this out.
Hold on a second. All right.
Okay.
Real time. There we go. This is me bumming around my house, so forgive my flip flops and short. I don't go anywhere. So,
hey man, it's Black Friday.
Well, this is every day for me. I mean, I'm pretty, be it that I am COVID conscious and I kind of still,
I mean,
do my own thing. I just kind of
let's be honest. It's a special day, the day that I put on jeans.
Yeah, me too. Like the only time I do that is when I'm going on stage to play a show, or if it's really cold outside. But I, living in, spending most of my time in Arizona and California, I rarely have the latter. So, nighttime in the desert is cold, but here it's pretty much
Today's a little chilly. I'm in like kind of the Culver City area.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it is. It's overcast. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, oh, I should like put on a sweater. But I grew up in Minneapolis, so like I was talking to my family yesterday, and they're like, yeah, it's 28 degrees right now. I'm just like, nope.
It's like, it's not bad. Yeah. That's our drummer Dustin was him and his partner, they bought a farmhouse outside of St. Paul area. That's where they grew up, and I have a lot of good friends from there. And I grew up in Indianapolis, and it's very much the same kind of thing. And
yes.
I was thinking of it yesterday when I looked outside and was like, man, it's such a beautiful day out. And I was like, this is Thanksgiving Day. So this is, I remember I'd be waking up and it would be like in the 20s. And I looked and I'm like, oh, wow, the whole Northeast is just like getting snow. I'm like, I feel very grateful.
Yeah, I think we made a good choice.
I think so too. Yeah. But Minneapolis music, man, that's my town. Like there's so much great music came from there. Be it like Husker Du, Old Soul Asylum, and the Replacements are one of my all-time favorite rock groups. So,
yeah. I mentioned briefly, but yeah, First Ave puts on like Replacements tribute shows, and so
yeah, you're right. You played one of those. You said
I did a couple.
Killer!
It was like such an honor, because like it's First Ave, and they're asking you to do these things.
Yeah, when I played that place, and I was like, I can't believe I'm playing here.
Yeah, and it's like every time I played there a bit, and like it was so surreal growing up in Minneapolis and like going to shows there, and like I probably saw you guys at like the Quest. But
oh yeah, I remember that place too. Yeah,
which is gone now.
Yeah, that was.
It was like Prince's. He like started that venue, I think.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that was his place. Yeah, I think they told me that when I played there. I was like, I had no idea. Yeah, there were a few venues that kind of came and went there. There was that place. There wasn't there like Caboose or something?
Caboose, yeah.
I didn't like that place that much. No offense.
Not my favorite.
I love First Avenue and then the Entry were just always great. And then there were some like DIY spaces like long before that we'd play before we could, in the 90s and very, very early 2000s. But I forgot some of the names of the places, but there were some really good ones. But yeah, because my buddy Mark Dean, who was our roadie, was from there. And then my buddy Ian ran this Drinking with Ian site that was like, he grew up in Indiana, and he was, and so I had two good friends from there, and they were friends with like all those local bands like Lifter Polar and Selby Tigers and Sean Coleman and all those, like who went on and did like Sha Na Na and like, Harmark Superstar. So we were like, we'd go there and play, and we were just like a little punk rock band, and we had our nerdy indie rock merch guy and all these people, and so he'd always be turning us on all these great Minneapolis bands, and it was such a great music scene, and even beyond the like bands that people know, but yeah, I mean, I love those early Soul Asylum records, and then of course Prince, but and then Husker Du, that was Sugar Copper Blue was beyond the Paul Westerberg thing. That was the real reason I chose Lou Giordano, because I thought Copper Blue and like Bob Mould's solo band Sugar was like the most like, I remember that being just one of the most like even solid sounding records in the 90s, and I loved it. It was like, right there with like Matthew Sweet and all those other like great like 90s big power pop records, and I was like, God, this is so fucking good. Yeah. And so we went with Lou, and he did Sam I Am Clumsy, and but yeah, he had a lot of great Westerberg stories, and he toured as Husker Du sound engineer for a while, and on their last tours, and he was really, he's a great guy. And but anyway, back to
we can dive back in. Actually, just real quick, I think you just might get a kick out of it. A buddy of mine, so Tommy Stinson just played in Minneapolis, and
he was opening. He's got a Disney playing there, opening for. Is it on the Soul Asylum show coming up too or something?
I think he's doing something there, but he headlined a show at a place called the Dakota Jazz Club, which is because it's Tommy Stinson. But but he kind of like hires locals to kind of just like come in and sit in or whatever. And
I didn't know that. I didn't know he has like sit-in players.
He just kind of like picks up people as he goes.
Like follow him, but he just like the pickup band thing, like where this country guys.
Right. So my buddy was playing drums with them, and they did like a rehearsal or something, and he was just like, oh yeah, can we like run that one again? I just want to like get this part right. He's like, I don't really want it to be that rehearsed. Yeah. Just like,
I love it.
Nope, I think we're good.
That's great. I mean, people would probably have an anxiety attack if they knew how little we rehearsed. Like me and our bass player are neighbors. Like we live mean, pretty close. But our drummer lives in Minneapolis and our guitar player lives in Colorado.
I
And
didn't
then
know
we
that.
also have the two guys that were in the So Long Story Alive lineup
Yep.
that play drums and guitar who sometimes play with us too. So we kind of have like two rotating lineups right now. Like we'll intend to do some more like So Long Story band reunion shows,
Mm-hmm.
and then we also just play with my drummer and my drummer Dustin and my guitar player Brian. Like they're my good friends and I have a loyalty to them.
Yeah.
But after the pandemic happened, it was like I hadn't played live music in a long time. I didn't know when I would again. Had at least a couple years off before I eased back into doing it. And I was like, you know what? When I do come back and play again, I want it to be something that like is really exciting to our fans and really impactful,
Mm-hmm.
and to be like the biggest thing I could do. Because I mentioned to you briefly, it's like we just toured too much, and I knew if I did play, it would just be very sporadic now. Because I got to a point where I learned to kind of like do other have other ways to make a living of like, I did a bunch of live streams and things like that. I
Yep.
saved a bunch of money and I got to a point where like I don't have to play now, but I love playing, but how can I do that and still feel safe after almost dying with COVID in 2020?
Yeah.
So my thing was like, all right, I will do it, but I'm only going to do these gigs where I like go play and then get out and that's it. And so,
Mm-hmm.
there'll be a point where I'll probably maybe play some more than beyond that. But right now it works and like it worked to my advantage because the guarantees went up, the shows got bigger and better, and
Yeah.
we went from playing smaller clubs to like that bumped up to the next size clubs. But when we came back to play again, it was like, let's do this solo.
Oh no. Oh boy.
To play shows again, and so he plays bass with us now most of the time, and in the live band, and then yeah, we have two guitars, two drums. But point being, we don't do any rehearsals at all. I will be like, okay, here's the songs to learn them, and here's how like me and Dustin and Ryan were kind of playing them live. So like because the songs, they evolve over the years. They don't
Yeah.
sound exactly like the record. I mean, I think the coolest compliment I'll get is like, oh wow, I really love how you keep these songs true to the idea, but they sound really like fresh and new, and like they've been like road worn, and they've like evolved in a good way. And
Yeah.
yeah, and so that's how we do it, and we literally get on stage, and that's our rehearsal. Now, in a perfect world, when you get out and you get on the road and you're like 5 shows into a tour, you start to sound really like connected and well
Mm-hmm.
oiled, and you can pick up cues from each other. And I feel that element gets a little lost sometimes, but I think it also pushes us to where now we can show up and play, and I don't have anxiety about it anymore. I know, like, if we get into the first song and like that sounds good, I'm like, okay, it's gonna be okay. We
Mm-hmm.
have it like 2 shows that we've done in the past, out of all the ones we've done where I'm like, that wasn't great, but it was just elements like shit broke, or I just, we had one guitar player that last minute couldn't do it because his flights got completely just snowed in.
Oh
And then we
no.
had to play as a 3-piece a couple shows. And I don't prefer doing that, but we made it
Yeah.
work. But
Sure.
overall, yeah, we never rehearse either. So I relate to your Tommy Stinson story.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of people probably wouldn't know, but it's
Now,
something.
that's the thing. They
Yeah.
don't.
Something
Yeah.
that I learned from when I was kind of playing every day and like playing, like filling in for different people. And, like I have to learn all of these songs or blah, blah, blah. So much of what you see at a concert is often unrehearsed. It's often just like people just
Yeah.
being like a loose understanding of what's about to happen and just like hoping for the best.
But that's good. I mean, it makes it exciting, and I feel
It
that
does. Yeah.
that's the thing I just kept reminding myself, like what you said, is like usually the only people who might know are people who've come to multiple shows or nerdy musician people like you or myself. But most people in the audience, they're just there for a feeling, a nostalgia, a good
Yes.
time.
Mm-hmm.
They just want to leave and enjoy themselves. So as long as you don't like pronounce that you're fucking up something or you're like not having your best show, and you just like remind yourself, like, dude, just have fun. Just
Yeah.
make sure that at the end of the day, like for me, all I want to do is like make sure that people enjoy themselves. And I think there have been times in my life and it's just fair because there's still part of me that's like the artist nerd guy without sounding like a pretentious idiot. But I really love to like put my 100% into everything. And if I'm playing something, I want to believe it and feel it. And there are a handful of songs that like, I'm like maybe like 3 songs that I've written where I'm like, I'd rather not play those. But sure. 90% of what we play in our set is what I feel people would want to hear. And then I'll take 10% now where it used to be like 60-40, where I'd be like, I want to play a bunch of shit that like I want to play. But I'm like, you know what? You're not buying a ticket to your show. Yeah, so now I play some deep cuts because I know there are repeat people that come to shows that want to hear a few of those. Mm-hmm. But the majority wants to hear the songs they want to hear. And we always play In This Diary. We always play San Dimas. We always play those songs because and for a long time we didn't play Boys of Summer. And I'm like, dude, quit being an idiot. Play that song. It's a great song. There's a reason why you covered it. I covered it because I love the song. And it was a tribute to my grandmother who passed away, who bought me that record when I was, when my parents were split up, then they got remarried. But when they were split up and I was visiting her in Florida, I remember it was a rainy, shitty summer, and I got stuck in their little trailer in Florida, and I couldn't go out to the theme parks. And so she was like, hey, we'll take you out and let you pick out a record. And I remember taping that song off the radio and ended up buying that record. And when she died, I was like, I'm going to record this song in tribute to her. So yeah, I mean, in the end of the day, you play the songs that are meaningful to you, but also I try to give people what they want. But
is there any songs that you really want to play but you feel might be a little self-indulgent?
Oh no, I don't think of that. I think if I were gonna do that, I would just like do, I would reserve it for like just a couple per show, I mean, as long as, I feel like, the bulk of the set, if you're playing like 15 songs, as long as 13 of those are songs people want to hear, and then you can take, I've seen the Stones multiple times, and even them, you'll know they do that fan vote for one song. So I'm always like, cool, I got to hear Beast of Burden finally. I got to hear Dead Flowers. Yes. But, or I got to hear Let It Bleed. Those are great. That's great. But the rest of the set, it's like, I know I'm going to hear all these songs. But they do rotate like 3 of them, and that's great. So if you see them, or like Wilco, they never play the same set twice. Radiohead don't. So we play the bulk of our set are going to be there. And then we're doing that thing now where we'll rotate a few deep cuts. So those deep cuts, whatever I want. But it's going to be something that I think some of the fans that have seen us multiple times will be like, holy shit, they played that song finally? Yeah. But I think for me, the only thing I try to steer away from is like anything that like I wrote that was just kind of like silly or novelty. It doesn't speak to me. I don't mind singing a song that I wrote that is really personal about somebody that I'm not in love with anymore. I have no problem with that. Or something that I wrote that's really like personal about my life. I would rather do that any day of the week. I just want to make sure every 5-minute block in the set is something that still has some sort of depth or meaning to me. And the like 3 songs I've written that are just kind of jokey, it was me trying something in the moment, and I feel those are kind of like dated, and luckily those aren't like key songs, except for like one of them, but that like people would even notice aren't there. But occasionally you'll have somebody like, play that one, like they don't even know that one. Blame the band. They don't, but I don't know that I think that's why we try to do those like full album play shows too, because then there will be like a few songs we'll probably rarely play that somebody will get to hear. And I like that. I saw Weezer play Pinkerton. I saw Jane's Addiction play the Ritual album. I'm a sucker for that stuff because I know as a fan, I'll get to hear some songs that maybe an artist will never play it otherwise. So that's cool. Well, anyway, yes. Yeah. Well, yeah. Well,
yeah. Next time you guys play in LA, if you happen to toss something from maybe like Not Capable of Love or something like that. Welcome to Night, I think, is an underrated.
Welcome to Night. I intend to teach the band some more of those songs. The only reason we don't play much of those live is just because when we recorded that album, it was 7-piece, and we actually did all that live. And tracked it all live in one room except for the vocals and a little bit. That was the only album where, like, that's the thing. Like, a lot of people will be like, how something is in the studio is not how it really is. I mean, that was the one album with the Ataris where it wasn't just me playing everything except for the drums. And it's funny. People would always be like, "Hey, why don't you make an album that sounds more like So Long Astoria? Bring back the old band." It's like, I played all those parts.
Yeah,
it is the old band. In fact, the album you didn't like is actually everybody playing. So it's the great and powerful Oz is not what you think. Just to be funny. It's like David Bazan had that lyric I love. It's like fucking where he's talking about David Byrne doing that interview on the Bob Costas show. It's like I don't know. That's a really great line.
Still run the show.
Yeah. Don't you forget it.
Yeah.
He's like, me and my pride responded, it's fucking
I got
great.
news for you. None of you have to.
Yeah. But nonetheless.
I think of that song every time I make an album.
Me too. Yeah. And I think you should, because you're at the end of the day, the one that is going to have to sing those songs and be proud of them. And you just write for you, and then hopefully people like it. But I love Welcome to the Night. I'm proud of it. And it's cool that like the Pinkertons of the world and those kind of albums that a lot of people went back as they grew up and discovered it. And I didn't expect people to get that album when I wrote it. I just like, this is what I'm writing. This is what feels right. I think, in hindsight, if there would have been an album between So Long Astoria and that album, it would have fit into our catalog. But I think it was one of those albums, people needed an album to grow into it, because most of those people probably they weren't my age, I would imagine. They didn't have they didn't listen to the same bands, which is fair, because, I imagine most of the bands I listened to were probably 10 years older than me. And I imagine they turned me on to a lot of music. So it's just how it works in life. I think your music you listen to, it's generally skipping a generation a lot of the times. And it's cool that once they caught up to that album, I think it really spoke to a lot of people. And we will add some more songs from that. It's just, again,
I love that album.
Not living in the same cities and the laziness, because there's really like a lot of intricate parts in those songs.
It's a little more complicated. Yeah.
Sure. And I have to transpose something that has cello and keys and make it work for a band with two guitars, which I can do. Mm-hmm. We do a lot of like atmospheric kind of like shoegazy layers with pedals and stuff now, where as long as I just have to sit and like break it apart. But yeah, there's like 4 or 5 songs on the album I want the band to know, so we can play them and have them not every night, but like, put like one in the set each night.
For the deep cut.
Yeah, exactly. For the deep cut. But yeah, thank you for the kind words.
Oh my gosh. That album, you guys put out like a thing on, I think it was either your website or MySpace, and it was just kind of talking a lot about your influences for the album.
Yeah.
And like you were kind of talking about that artist who introduced you to a lot of music. That was kind of the thing for me. Like you have always kind of been like, I like, Built to Spill and The Descendants, and like that's in some of your songs. And that one you were like, we've been listening to a lot of My Bloody Valentine and Page of the Lion. And I was just like, I trust this guy's taste in music. I'm going to listen to these bands. And then I heard Control, and I feel like that was like a shift for me, where it was just like, I pretty much only listened to either punk rock or like the saddest sad boy shit you can imagine. And then like now there's like a weird middle ground where it kind of blends the two, and like, this is interesting. And so that album was a gateway for, I think, a lot of people.
I think so. That era had a lot of those bands, especially, if you look at I'd like to think of like that time for me. It's like, I checked your Facebook, some bands that you were talking about you liked. Because obviously there was that time. There was also Death Cab for Cutie, Transatlanticism album came out, which was a phenomenal album. That year there was like, that Saddle Creek label was putting out a lot of good music. They put out like Curse of the Ugly Organ, Rilo Kiley album that came out that year, which was not More of Interest, the one before it, right?
That was what, Takeoffs and
No. Hold on, I've got the. I'll tell you right now. Oh my god, and my brain is so bad. iTunes guy here.
No, I know which one you're talking about. Oh my god,
the longer title.
Yeah,
it is.
This is a music podcast.
The Execution of All Things.
Yes.
Yeah, that album also, and it was, and I like the production of those albums, because it was those guys, I think AJ and Mike Mugas from Omaha that were recording those. I really loved their their recording was just really, similar vibes to some of the stuff I like. And then I love David Bazan's recording too. Like him and that guy Aaron Sprinkle, who was the engineer on Control. Who I met that guy in a bar one night in Seattle when we were there, and I've been 10 years sober, but back when I still drank, and I kind of geeked out on him about the recording of that album, and I think I freaked him out a little. But yeah, he was in. It's funny because our buddies MXPX, they were on that Christian label Tooth and Nail, and he was in. Aaron Sprinkle was in one of those bands that was on that label for a while. So it was just like a small world of. But yeah, Bazan. But I guess Bazan did come from that like Christian world too. But anyway, that was a great year for music because you're right. It was this kind of meeting point for a lot of the people from that world of punk rock into that world of kind of indie rock or like whatever you call it, or like some of the folk Americana stuff and everything kind of, and then obviously you had a lot of those big artists like Bright Eyes and people which they kind of, that all kind of merged. And I think, it was a cool time for music because, obviously those albums, I mean, if you look, Death Cow and Postal Service, just that tour selling out are like huge amphitheater shows 2 times in a row. It's like, because those albums do transcend, and they've now went on, and the new generation has discovered them and all those old fans. And I think that's what's really cool at this reconvergence of music that's happening from our world, is that in taking the time off that we did, and I remember pre-2020 going out and playing, and we were playing, like Whiskey, Roxy, Troubadour, like 800 cap rooms, which are great, iconic rooms. And then when we came back, we sold out the Wiltern, which is a huge theater. House of Blues, which is a huge theater. And it was like, this is cool. I'm the guy who love DIY small spaces. It's not about that. But for me, it's cool to know that like taking time off and, coming back at a time when this like world of music is like got even bigger than it was before 2020 and when I stopped playing it. And I think that does contribute to the fact that a lot of those bands, Versus Cell Jawbreaker got back together, and then some of the bigger bands like Blink or Green Day or those kind of bands are doing these massive arena tours now, and it's like, this is weird. We would play with these bands and be on tours with these bands, and so it's really cool that I've been able to coattail ride this world of making music for this long. But there's so much music out there that maybe 5 people get to hear, and I'm just as grateful for those artists. And I'm still the guy always like, going through like YouTube, like, if you like this, you will like this. I'm like, ooh, and then 3 hours lost on a rabbit hole of just nerdy shit. And then suddenly I discovered like 1960s Japanese folk music that was influenced by like 60s Beatles and Kinks and, British music when those bands discovered drugs. So that's a true story. There's so much great, like the band Happy End from Japan. There's like this whole world of great. I'm like, holy shit. I never discovered this because these bands didn't sing in English, but these records just sound like Japanese people aping like all the albums I love from Britain of that era. And it's like, suddenly I discovered this like whole world of music I didn't know existed. So,
well, sign me up for listening to Happy End. That sounds like it's right up.
They're great. Yeah, there's two bands I'll recommend from that era. That Happy End are the one. If you've seen Lost in Translation, which I'm sure you have,
I have.
They're on the soundtrack. We have one song that's in the scene when Bill Murray when he's out in the hallway at the karaoke bar, and
sure, that
song's kind of playing faintly in the background, but it's on the soundtrack. And I won't even bother to try and say the title because I'll butcher it. But but there's that band, and there was another singer-songwriter of another folk band at the time. But that band, they were called Hachimitsu Pie, which kind of stands, I think it's like honey pie, what it translates. Okay. But they have an album that is so good, and it's just like super Laurel Canyon-y folk Americana, and you can find on YouTube. It's called Sentimental Street, which that's what it translates to. It came out in 1973, which is like, I think it's like Dory something. I don't know. You'll see it, but it's, if you look up Hachi Mitsu, one word, pie, and the Sentimental Street, 1973, you'll find that album. And Happy End, their album, Kaze Machi Roman is 1971, and then the self-titled is 1973. But those albums are like, they're regaled as like the Japanese Beatles, and like they're kind of the band that like in Japan in the history of rock and roll, they're like the band. And
Sure, yeah.
and Hachimitsu Pai weren't as known, but the guy who is in that band and the singer-songwriter in that band, he kind of went on to do a bunch of other projects and still plays today. And,
Sure.
and he's regaled as like an icon too, like, you know, the John Lennon or something. But anyway, yeah, rabbit holes are great. And I'm still that guy that will go down those rabbit holes and try to find anything and everything. Like another one for me was like, got in a bad car accident a handful of years back, like 2018, 2019, got hit by the driver of a high-speed chase. And I always like to say that I'm glad it happened, because if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have fell in love with jazz. Because after that, the van that I owned got destroyed, and the new van I got only had a cassette player, a CD player. And so I was like, you know what? Here's one world of music I've always enjoyed. And I'll turn on NPR or some low dial stations and listen to jazz, but I never really deep dived like the greatest jazz records. So I went through multiple lists, and I kind of like, okay, what albums are repeating on everyone? Like, of course I knew like Kind of Blue by Miles, and I knew these like main records, and I'm like, what else do I need to buy? And so I just went out and bought all these jazz records on CD and cassette, and I would listen to them nonstop on tour. And that's how I fell in love with jazz. And now like, it's to me like the new punk rock. It's just like this world of music that really just blew my mind. Starting with the first one was Charles Mingus. He put out this one great album where he actually lets his therapist do the liner notes. And I thought that was really, really, really brilliant. But it was just like, I think when you get too into like the like Ornette Coleman, like very, very like wild, noisy jazz, or later era Miles, it loses me. And then too like kind of quiet jazz. I like super chill jazz stuff, but I mean, the stuff that people, when they think of jazz, they think of like being in a dentist's office. That is not jazz. I mean, it's whatever, but but there's a good happy medium for me. And that Charles Mingus album, oh my God, my brain is so bad. It's the album that made me really fall in love with jazz was, if I can find my damn, I'm going through my library, but this is a record that's all-time favorite for sure. Where the hell is it? Mingus. It's oh gosh.
I personally really loved Mingus.
That is definitely one. But mine was the one that I found first was The Black Saint and the Sinner Lady. I think that's
sure.
That's right. And I later found, because he was the person who was my gateway to jazz, I found the coolest item. I collect weird relics. I found a contract for when he played a show in 1973 in Cincinnati, Ohio on eBay. And it's all yellowed and smoke stained. And it's like him signing for like $200 to get paid to play, or maybe it was $800. But nonetheless, it was like, dude got paid this to play a show. And it's like, it's like, hold on, I'll show it to you if you want to see it. It's pretty,
of course.
Hold on a second, I'll grab it. Pretty awesome. I'll show you a few things. All right, so let's do. Okay, so first we'll do the Mingus one.
Wow. Okay.
I still haven't done it fit up. I'm really bad about it. So this is the Mingus contract. So we're getting. Let me shut this window.
That's so cool already.
Yeah, if I can reflect. Okay, so it's if you can see it, signed down here, Charles Mingus.
Oh my!
And and that's paid $300.
$300. I mean,
so I got a few. I collect some weird. I think that in my collection, the coolest one. This was a gift from my ex-wife. Really amazing. This is a letter written Charles Bukowski, writing to Charles Bukowski from a shop in Michigan that wanted him to come and do a reading, but he notoriously didn't enjoy reading. So it was like, Hank. I told Paul Lichter, the bookstore owner, that you aren't giving public readings at present time. It's basically him saying, I would appreciate it if you could drop him a line. And so this is his, I think, manager or publicist telling him to write him a letter. And he goes, he wrote here, he goes, Hello, Paul. I hate to read. Thanks. Or thanks anyhow, Bukowski. Yeah. So this is my assigned Bukowski letter. And then
Wow.
got this is Lou Barlow of Sebadoh and Dinosaur Jr. It's my favorite Sebadoh song. He did a handwritten lyric. A girl put this song as breakup on a breakup mix to me once. And the line in the chorus is like, I think our love is coming to an end. And it's one of my favorites. So
wow.
and this, my Bob Hogue gave me when the Ambassador Hotel, where Robert Kennedy was shot, got demolished. They raided the place and got a bunch of artifacts from it because they were going to destroy it anyway. And I have original blueprints to the Ambassador Hotel.
No way.
Yeah, these are from the vault. And Bob has some in Flying Blanket. So that's another one I'm proud of. And this is Keith Morris' Black Flag set list from the Full Flag show. See how long it is? It's ridiculous. I had to make a friend of this.
That's incredible. And I also love that that's probably only like 25 minutes of music.
It is, yeah. Anyway, so that's a few things. And but yeah, I love collecting stuff like that.
That's so cool.
Yeah, the more of a story they have to them, the better. There was this book I really loved. Where's that? Is it on my shelf? Yeah. This artist in New York did this book where they collected all these really cool relics and things that had a story, like, kind of like the Mutter Museum in Philly. I think it's in Philly or DC, where they had like fragments of Lincoln's skull and like the bullet that killed him. And then they had like, well, this is like that, but like a step further. And they put it in like hard catalogs.
Sure.
And they did a little art displays with the pieces, and they had a little stories. So I was like, I really got moved by this book. And I just love how, like, I don't know, there's like Bing Cosby's tobacco pouch, lipstick from Mortician cosmetic case, Marilyn Monroe's handkerchief. There's like weird, cool little curiosa. That's the name of the book. Huh. So anyway, that was like the thing that made me want to be a weird collector and to collect things that have a story behind them, just like my songs and things. And I really try to put the story in the song, and to tie it back to the Weakerthans. That's one thing I feel that John K. Samson is really good at, and really blows me away how he can take that whole just little items and objects and somehow make it into this great vast thing that really just pulls you in as a listener and as a writer. And anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't want to take up the entirety of your day, but
you're not. I have nothing going on today. We launched the website, and now my day was going to consist of just me and my French bulldog hanging out, me listening to her snore. That's kind of usually what I do. So
yep, I've got a lab mix over here who's doing the same. So yeah, but let's touch on Reconstruction Site. Reconstruction Site was the third album from them. It got a 5.6 on Pitchfork, which means that's how you know it's good.
That's right.
They called it. They said that it would make finely catchy radio signals for fans of faux Weezer geek rock, which I think is actually pretty accurate.
I don't hear the Weezer thing, but I mean, a geek rock, yeah, definitely. I guess I could see that. Yeah.
There was like one song where I was like, I guess I could see it, but there was actually was Uncorrected Proofs was a song.
That's great. That's a great lyric in that song.
Yeah, the lyrics are so good. The chorus melody it gave me chills, and then
phenomenal.
Yeah, and the instrumentation and the production actually kind of reminded me, and I know it came out the same year as So Long Astoria, but it felt similar as far as how it hits and like how it doesn't, it feels like, of the genre adjacent, but not necessarily in there.
Great compliment. Yeah, I was very much listening to this album at the time.
I was going to ask.
I feel this album's probably a bit more like, I hadn't quite yet refined. Like I like nowadays, I feel my guitar sound live and in the studio, I use a 1964 Bassman amp, and sometimes I'll use my amp I use live and live. It's like a 1979 Orange or 80. And back then, I loved like old amp sounds and things were a little more, not cleaner, but just more, not just cleaner, but more clarity. And it can be driven, when you put two guitars together that have, that aren't just super blown out, if you get a lot of like grip and gain like these guitars have on Reconstruction Site, and it still sounds punchy and it still sounds like a rock album, but it just doesn't sound muddy. Like a lot of punk rock albums you listen to, especially at that time, the guitar is like, you have one guitar sound and it's already like super driven, and you put another with it and it just sounds, you don't hear the string clarity, you don't hear the notes. Well, this album, Reconstruction Site, I really loved how kind of almost had like a more folky indie kind of clarity to the production, but it was still had these like gritty kind of like, almost punky punk rock kind of, power pop kind of hooks and choruses. So it really straddled that line. Whereas Song of Story, I don't think I was quite good at doing that yet, but that was the album where I always say that I learned how to finesse my songwriting working with Lou Giordano, and I really learned peaks and valleys and the importance of a big chorus that comes in and to drop the verse. And really, when I wrote like San Dimas, like there's no structure to that song. I couldn't write that today if I tried. There's no chorus, but it works somehow. I feel there's something beautiful about writing and you don't think about it and it just comes out and doesn't make sense on paper. But I also feel like, working with somebody like Lou Giordano made me appreciate like, oh, okay, there is a craft to writing a song. And if you look at all the folk songs like Dylan wrote or, Tom Waits wrote, or there's all kinds of songs that go off on cool tangents. And, like Dylan, he's the king of having 64 verses in a song. And somehow I'm like still enthralled. Yes. And there's still a story and there's still the narrative. But yeah, Reconstruction Site, I feel like it taught me some things. And I definitely took away like, man, sonically, it's still driving and it still just has this like really powerful feeling, but it's not completely overblown or driven. And the guitars, they sound more like what I yearn for in like guitar world. And I feel like that's kind of what I ended up, not just this album, but in general, like there were a lot of other albums I listened to there were rock albums, but they had a more defined, clear guitar sound that wasn't super like distorted. And so then I found my orange amp when we were playing a show on the East Coast at like I used at a shop, and I played it and I'm like, this is what I've been looking for. And then after that, I used to own this JCM 800 Marshall that was Blake's, and Blake from Jawbreaker bought it from Ian Mackay when they had an amp break, I guess, on a tour on the East Coast, and it was Ian's practice amp, I've been told, in Fugazi. And so it was an heirloom of an amp, and I bought it from my buddy Dave Ehrlich, who played in this nerd rock band Nerf Herder, and was a incredible guy. And so Dave sold it to me, and I used that amp on almost every record the Ataris made in some fashion. I would change up amp sounds. I'm always a fan of doing different guitar sounds for a bunch of songs and having variety. But that was at least featured on every album. And then after Song of Story, I was like, you know what? I want this amp to like keep growing and moving, and it deserves to like keep living. And so Jerry Finn, the producer, bought it from me in an auction off of eBay. He's like, can you stop your auction now? I used that amp when I was recording Jawbreaker Dear You, and it's the best sounding Marshall I've ever heard. It was like a 1980 JCM 800, and I'm like, yeah. So I sold it to him for $3,000, and he continued to use it. And then he unfortunately passed really young with I think a brain aneurysm. And then
may he rest in peace.
Yeah, he's a really, I never got to really know him, but he produced Smoking Popes, Destination Failure, Super Drag, Head Trip in Every Key, Dear You, three albums that are sonically some of my favorite albums.
Yeah, and he produced what was a turning point for me. I'm a bit younger, but Enema of the State, Blink-182. I think for a lot of people who are of a certain age, that was the one. Like
AFI and those bands. I didn't really listen to those bands, but I do feel like he did a Cure album, he did a Morrissey album. So he's one of those producers that for every walk of life, for every age group, there was some record in your collection that him and like Rob Cavallo, who did he worked with, I mean, if I'm not correct, he worked with Rob Cavallo on Dookie, did he not?
I think he engineered and I think he mixed a couple of songs.
So motherfuck, like that is like, what a resume. And then
he ended up with that amp, which is so cool.
Yeah, and he ended up with the amp which he had already used, which is the Circle of Life. And then an even bigger Circle of Life is that Adam, friend and drummer of Jawbreaker, bought it from the estate of Jerry Finn, and now Blake used it in all the reunion shows when Jawbreaker got back together. So I remember standing on stage, on the side of the stage at Riot Fest at their first show back. Right there is my amp, and I remember seeing it. I'm like, it's so fucking wild, because you could see, like, I had Blake sign it at a Jets of Brazil show, and he just signed it real big, and I graded out so it didn't. You could tell if you went up to it. I went over it because he signed it in white marker, and I remember I didn't want it to say Blake real big. I just wanted it to be faint, and so I could still see him. Like, that's so fucking weird, but that's my amp, and it was his amp, and then it was my amp, and so that amp, I'm glad that it goes on living, and it's cool. But yeah, sonically, this Reconstruction Site, I think it was a phenomenal album. Ultimately, I think the thing for the Weakerthans that makes me choose them the most is just lyrically. I mean, these songs. There were a lot of records I told you that I love. My all-time favorite record, like My Bloody Valentine, Loveless, or the recent Cigarettes After Sex last 3 albums I love.
So
but those are more about a feeling. And they're more about a vibe. I put them on, and I couldn't tell you one lyric of Loveless still this day, because it's like an instrument in the music.
Yes, but it's almost like a Sigur Rós album. Yes.
Well, they're even one further. They create words that are real.
Not even real.
Yeah, they said they created a language for some of those early records, which is but yeah, great band too. But yeah, this album specifically, I feel is a lyrical high point. And it's songs that I just feel are phenomenal as songs. But if I may, there's one song in particular, but it's actually on the previous album that I wanted to mention the lyric.
Let's get into it, yeah.
It just crushes me every time I hear it. But again, it's hard to pick apart somebody else's song. But what I gather from this song, I'm trying to find it. The song "Exiles Among You" on "Left and Leaving" is like. Oh. Yeah, there's a line at the end where he's kind of just, I guess, to make it impactful, I kind of got to set up the song, but he's the character in the song is talking about it says her body is a difficult sister and she loves her, so I'm gathering he's talking about a sister of the person, but anyway, at the end of the song, the great part of for me, the payoff of the whole song, it's so rather than calling home, phoning home to the sister or whatever, she sits there and does this instead. So it's the person in the song, it's she shoplifts some Christmas gifts and a bracelet for herself and considers phoning home, has some quarters in her hand, but she sits down on the sidewalk and bites her bottom lip and spends the afternoon willing traffic lights to change. Who the fuck writes that?
Yeah.
It's dude, there's such sadness and beauty in that is just it crushes me, because it's you feel the hope in the line of she's right there, she's about to call home, and again, it's all interpretation, but to me it's this person is missing out of the life of the other sibling maybe, and they're considering reaching out, but instead as the dreamer, the kind of vagabond, drifter, whatever that they are, they instead sit down and do this beautiful thing where they spend the afternoon willing traffic lights to change. Something I remember sitting there as a kid and looking at the traffic light and being okay, it's just who writes that? But that is, to me, a good metaphor for all of John's lyrics. I mean, he just can take these little situations and just somehow make it so eloquent. And I try to strive for that. In this new song that we're going to be releasing, the first 7-inch, I feel in some of these new songs, and starting with So Long a Story, I feel I started to kind of get better at doing that and really become a better vivid storyteller and focus more on narratives. But there's some lyrics in that, if I may, I'll tell you. There's one line in the second verse specifically, because the song it's written. I wanted to write it from a perspective where the listener will hear it, but you may think I'm singing about a person, but I'm really singing about all of the adventures and the things I saw driving around the country in North America in my first car that I bought with my own money, which was a 2003 Dodge Neon.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so this car went to Canada, North America, all over the States. I drove it all over on multiple tours and had so many adventures until finally the car, there was a lady who slammed on her brakes in traffic in Indianapolis. Traffic came to a halt, and there was this giant, like one of those like construction signs with the message on them. And I could have slammed into her and hit her, or I swerved off and I hit that and peeled back the top of the car like a sardine can. And I remember walking away without a single shard of glass. I felt like Jules in Pulp Fiction. Like, did God come down and stop the bullets? It's fucking wild.
Yeah.
But so I wrote. So the song basically starts off as me seeing the car in a junkyard with like flowers springing up out of its body where it now rests. It's like the first line in the song is like, now you rest amongst the rust of these roadside monuments. So it's basically setting up like, now this car is in this junkyard, in its new graveyard, its home where it rests. And in all these former glories, the drive-in nights that came and went, we fought on hard through rain-beaten nights, past the shadows of state lines. Now this victory dance, it belongs to you and I. So it's me setting it up. And then, but the verse I'm really proud of, which is where I tried to write some of my father into it and why I chose it to be on this 7-inch tribute to my father, is he spent his 32 years working at the automobile factory, making GM cars. Biggest automobile factory outside of Detroit was in my town, Anderson, Indiana, until they, all the jobs left in the 90s, and the last couple thousand were gone in early 2000s. But there's a line, the second verse is me kind of describing when I went back, kind of like what I did in Song of Stories. I went back to my town I grew up, and I remember seeing it for the first time in a long time. And this was mid 2000s. I think I wrote this line. And I remember driving past the area where my father's factory once stood and just seeing, like where the car rests now, it's like full circle. It's like, these, they would make automobiles like the one that I had all these great memories in. Now this factory where that car was, many of those cars were made, is now a graveyard and just a field where, and the rest of my town looks like, it's this very totalitarian Eastern European vibe in the Midwest now, where you have all these boarded up factories and everything just looks like what you would imagine. It's very cold, very gray, very drab. So it was a winter day, and I remember, so I wrote this line. It says, the winter sky is weeping, the factories lie in their graves like Cold War artifacts marching in some ghost parade. We watched these streets of fire fall and crumble into the sea. Now, darling, won't you come on home to me? And so yeah, that's the line, just kind of describing those factories and the full circle of the car.
That's so cool. And
thanks.
I mean, the lyrics are fantastic. You've always been a very good lyricist, but
I appreciate it. I'll take it, but I feel I have my strong points, but there's, I'm getting better. So that's the thing to me, is as long as I feel like I'm improving, it's good. It's always the thing where, like I said, as long as you don't feel like, something you did previously is like you're getting worse, or, but thank you.
No, I hear what you're saying, though, as far as, kind of taking how John K. Samson kind of takes his songs, and there's like, I feel like a lot of your previous lyrics were like pretty, not to go back to what we were kind of saying before, but a little bit more plain spoken.
Yeah, especially like the relation. I feel I have like the songs that are very relationship based, or like personal stories like that. Or I have like a song, like the saddest song I wrote about having a daughter and relating that to how my father wasn't in my life for many years, and how he came back into my life. Or like I have those songs that I feel are a little bit more straightforward or surface, and I try to have some more depth and vivid narratives in the verses, but then I like to have a big chorus hook too. I'm a fan of having something you can sing, because like, as much as I love Springsteen, like I feel like he is also great about, in a lot of songs, having a good singable chorus hook, because you can't sing something that's super wordy and doesn't repeat as well. And I want to have that. So, even a song like My Reply, which was about somebody who wrote me a letter from the hospital telling how she was going through eating disorder, and she struggled with like, suicide and some other things like that. And I feel like I wanted to write this as a for line response, at least the verse, to her letter, so she knows it's for her, but write it in a way that's broad enough to where other people can relate to it. So yes, definitely songs like that. But then, I feel like songs like Fast Times at Dropout High, or like
Hmm.
Song Astoria, which I feel are more akin to what I write now.
Yeah.
And there are those, but yeah, you don't just, I feel you don't just go from A to that overnight. You really, I
Yeah.
think it was
No.
So Long Astoria album and working with Lou Giordano was when I realized, like, okay, what songs am I most proud of what I've written, and what do I feel I do the strongest? And I felt like songs like So Long Astoria, like Unopened Letter to the World, like those songs are the ones to me that I still feel like lyrically really hold up. Like In This Diary, I think it's a great song that really holds up, but it also is kind of the middle ground between what I was saying with this more straightforward songs in the chorus, but it has a strong narrative in the verse. So yes, yeah, it's just all about finding balance. And they're not all on all these new songs I've written. They're not all this wordy and poetic. I wish they were, but I mean, there's definitely some more straightforward ones.
You got to do it. You got
Yeah,
to do it sometimes.
but it's not. But it's ones that just came out naturally. Like
Yeah.
one new tune, I woke up from sleep, and I just remember having this melody in my head, and I, you know, remember seeing, like, it was a really beautiful scene of, like, the morning. You get a really good golden hour coming through this room in my apartment, and it was just really like a beautiful yellow golden hour in the morning, and I just remember seeing it, and I was like, had this full complete verse chorus melody coming to my mind, and this kind of, and I just like, okay, I better jot this down. So I just hummed it into my phone, and that song we recorded it, and it ended up being this like super fast kind of like Descendancy, all kind of punk rock song. And it was something like, I didn't think I would write a song like this again, but it literally was a complete thought. And I'm like, Bob, should I record this? I mean, he's like, yeah, it's fun, it's cool. And I think, that's a little more straightforward lyrically, but it still fits. If you don't want every song on a record to be the same thing,
No.
for me, I like to have some peaks and valleys there too. And so,
yeah,
there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, even with the Weakerthans, like, there are those songs on. If you listen to Reconstruction Site, one cool thing I think stands out is, like, there are songs that really differentiate from each other. There's the one song that everybody gravitates to, that plea from a cat named Virtue, where he writes the whole song in the perspective of the cat observing the owners.
Yeah, I love that perspective, and like in that kind of shift, and it almost adds, like, there's still a big heaviness to that song, but like finding out that it's from the perspective of a cat also at the same time adds like this layer of levity that is kind of necessary on an album that's just like so heavily talking about mortality.
Yes, sure. It even starts out like with like the opening and closing, because it's almost like
it's kind of a concept album.
Exactly. That's
sort of. Yeah.
Because you have the opening and the middle and the end are all those little short kind of like link tracks. Hospital Vespers,
Manifest, and Past
Manifest. And so he's writing, looking over the person, his friend, or in the hospital room, and it's like going through the artifacts that his friend, that he got from his friend's house who's dying or something. Like, it is. There is a lot of mortality in this album, and where it strikes such a great balance of being an album that is kind of lighthearted in places, but in a way where just enough to where, like, a great film that strikes a balance of being sadness and comedy. It's like comedy and tragedy, really just perfect balance of that. And it just shows that, like, as a human, and in the times I've met him, he's just such a sweet dude. Even when I met him the first time in that Propaganda show, I just remember him being really generous. And he had like a McDonald's McDeath button, because they were very always outspokenly a vegan band.
Sure,
and I wasn't at the time, but I thought it was really great as a kid. And he just like took it off its strap and gave it to me. He was such a sweetheart. And I remember seeing him years later when, like, it was like Lucero and the Weakerthans, and I forgot who else played that show in, like, Philadelphia when I was on tour. And he just somehow randomly remembered me. He goes, "Hey, Chris." I'm like, "How do you know who I am?" It was really cool. I was just like, "Oh man." Yeah, like, if you only knew, I'm like a super big nerd for your music. But but yeah, I think that really shows when you see somebody who's a really kind and generous human, but doesn't take themselves too seriously. I guess I was trying to say is that, like, sometimes that shows in the music. And it's good when you have somebody that's such a so good at writing these like brilliant narratives and these songs that seem so deep, but then there's still this level of like just uh, kind of kindness and not so seriousness of it. Because to me, like it can come across pretentious really easy when an artist is really fucking good, but they also are just like, I'm cool, really take themselves seriously. And I won't mention bands, but there's one artist specifically where I think they're really damn good, but I just never could get into songs for that reason. Because I'm like, these songs are great, but it just seems like a couple come to mind. A couple like seems like they just take themselves too seriously. Like I'm the first one. Like I will never give myself a fucking compliment. I'm happy to take it, and I'm getting better at that. But like, man, like I can't stand pretentiousness. It's just such a turnoff for me.
What's
like
the
just
point?
Humble, man. Yeah, exactly. What's the point? Like,
what is that doing for you?
There's a million other people out there doing what we do. It's like it's a thing, and I'm grateful to do it. But like I am doing it ultimately because I am a huge nerd and connoisseur of art, and I'm just writing what I love. And for those people to think theirs is somehow more important than somebody else's, like, dude, I respect fucking Taylor Swift or like pop music artists just as much as I do anything else, because when you're younger and you get that mentality like we all had when we were young, we're like, it's only this type of music is cool, or like, I remember, you'd have all those bumper stickers like, corporate rock sucks or whatever, and it's like all I want now is for the people I love who make art to be able to make a living off their art. Because as we all saw, when 2020 happened and like nobody had a job, or nobody could a lot of artists couldn't work. I couldn't tour forever and couldn't play shows. A lot of people in the film industry, same thing. Like, it's like, how do you make a living now? So it's like, if you create, if you paint, you do anything of an artistic nature, like you deserve to be paid for those things. And it's not the be all end all, but I mean, I think those things have value. And to me, that's why I'm happy to, buy handwritten lyrics by somebody or do something like that. Because to me, like, I love that stuff. I'm a big connoisseur of it. I love when I'm in a town, I'm like, oh my God, this movie was filmed here. We got to go visit the thing,
that might be the like the Midwest kid in us, I think, maybe.
I think so, yeah.
Where it's just like, we didn't have those things being in the Midwest, like.
No, because LA people who grew up here, you don't like, I mean, it's like, do you realize you live in a city where like so much of this history exists? And it's like, yeah. When I moved into California in 1996, I was like so geeking out about it. And then you just kind of like, it's kind of like, you live near the ocean. And then like, I realize I never go to the ocean. It's like you get desensitized to these things, but you drive down the street and you're like, holy shit, that's where like, fucking Pet Sounds was recorded right there. And when I got to go to that studio and see the studio and stand there with Bob, because he recorded a session there, I was like, this is amazing. This is like that's
There's so much cool stuff. I mean, even to mundane stuff, like the first time I went to In-N-Out Burger, I'm like, this is for the Big Lebowski, like oh my God. So
sadly the bowling alley's gone. But I never got to go there. But I love that film. I love the Coen brothers. So Minneapolis, or they're from Minnesota. Yeah.
They are, yes.
Yeah, A Serious Man is probably like the wild card that I love more. No Country for Old Men is my first and foremost, but A Serious Man is the one like everybody doesn't like, and it's my favorite.
I think it's great.
Big Lebowski's 3.
Yeah. This is very, very side note, very off topic, but the only time I've ever been on the news.
On what?
The only time I've ever been on the news, like the broadcast news. There was a Big Lebowski costume contest and like screening at a place called the Turf Club in St. Paul.
Okay.
And they, for some reason, asked me to judge and host. And so at the time, I'm also so.
Were you dressed up as well?
Oh yeah.
Okay, good.
I was like fully in character as the dude. And I'm also sober. I'm 6 years sober.
Oh hell yeah, man! Congratulations.
Thank you. But at the time, I was very in character. So I was about 6 White Russians in. And all of a sudden I'm like in the green room and they're watching the movie or whatever. And I'm, pouring myself another White Russian. And um, the manager of the Turf Club comes down. He's like, "Hey, there's the news stations upstairs that are waiting to talk to you." And I was like, "What?" And they're like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Which ones?" And he's like, "I don't know, all of them." And I went up there, and there's all these cameras, and I just continued doing it in character. So I did all these news interviews in character, and so there's a screen grab that somebody has where it just says Nick Costa, fan of Big Lebowski. And that's a badge of honor for me.
That's rad. Man.
But anyway, I digress.
That's fucking awesome. We stay at there's a cool old apartment style. It's a motel, I guess, but it's catered to bands and stuff. And Sam I Am told us about it. It's in Berlin, and they have TVs in the room, but there's basically 3 channels, and one just called Endless Loop, and it's literally just Endless Loop of Big Lebowski. And the other 2 channels are pointless because one's just like an information channel, and one is like German. And so it's like every time I was there, it's always 24 hours of Big Lebowski, and then I can't watch it forever because every time I watch it, it's always there. But it's cool because it's these old Eastern Bloc style, tall, lofty looking apartments that have been converted from an Eastern Bloc building in like Kreuzberg and like the old area of where East Berlin was, and really cool space. But I always think, when I think of Big Lebowski, I think of the Michelberger. It's like, looks like Michael Berger Hotel there, which is great. Right? Highly recommend staying there if you're ever there, because it's endless Big Lebowski and really cool vibes. Good like vegetarian food downstairs and good neighborhood. And I wrote a bunch of music there, and it's good, very inspiring space. But Big Lebowski, great film.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, we can get back into the album a little bit more. I also noticed that the album features another songwriter by the name of Sarah Harmer, who's another Canadian.
Yeah. They did some. She does the backups on I think on a handful of songs, right? Like
yeah. Have you ever listened to her music?
Yeah, I went down a rabbit hole one time because they backed up another Canadian artist. I forgot where they were his backing band around the time in between Reconstruction Site and the follow-up album, Civil Twilight, right? And then I looked into her songs as well because she played with them live at those shows they recorded in Canada, and I thought her songs were really great too.
Yeah, so, she has an album called I'm a Mountain that my partner introduced me to.
That's rad.
And like that album is unbelievable. There's a song called Oleander, where if
I think I downloaded that record right there around the time. I'll go back and listen to it now because like you were saying, like there are these like artists that sort of gateway you into things and into other artists, and I'm like you. I definitely, when somebody's featured on an album or is a part of a writing on an album, or I like to like look further into that artist as well, because it's like, well, if this group of individuals who I respect and admire their writing are kind of vouching for this other great writer, I imagine they've got to be great. And I've also discovered a lot of people that way because, somebody was a part of a project where I'm like, that's great, and I kind of, I respect that when artists like kind of use what they do to kind of help people discover other artists that they feel, are great in their music scene or equally amazing writers. So that is really cool.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that this album is, this album and this band are a really great kind of just like gateway to a lot of different styles of music, especially if you are somebody who was kind of raised with punk rock or something like that. It's nice because it goes across so many different genres. Even
agree.
In the same album.
There are those albums that do that I feel are. If you ask any person from an indie rock world or a punk rock world, I think there's certain albums that they will agree on that both walks of life will say is something they love or is in their collection. And I think this is probably one of them. I definitely recall multiple like punk rock dudes that I know that probably don't listen to some of the like, sad bastard snobby indie shit that I listen to or whatever, that they do love this album. And I'm like, well, if you like that, you should definitely check this out. And so yeah, I agree that this album, it definitely bridges the gap between those two genres for sure. Like folk and Americana as well as like indie rock stuff, and it sits just as much. I think it fits alongside great, smarter punk rock albums as well. If you listen, if you're a fan of the Menzingers or Against Me or Gaslight Anthem or those bands that kind of I feel are doing it right, that are coming from that world of like Jawbreaker and that kind of stuff that was a little bit more literary and a little bit more book smart, but also not so just everything's punk rock song, but it's punk rock for nerds who also read books.
Yeah, definitely.
Or like poetry or what have you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that note, I think that is a good stopping point. But
cool. Yeah, hope we didn't talk too much diatribes about other stuff for people.
No, it was.
Glad we could. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was so fun, and I also just wanted to say that just a short little story and thank you.
Sure.
There was a time, I think it was probably like 2004 or 5 at the Warped Tour. I was a kid. My aunt worked for Columbia Records, and
oh wow,
and she got us backstage passes to Warped Tour
in Minneapolis or where?
It was at the Somerset Amphitheater, Somerset, Wisconsin.
Where the big thing happens every year, the Summerfest.
Yes,
same place.
Summerfest happens
yes,
there.
I know that well. Yeah.
Yep. So Warped Tour was there that year. I had a guitar with me, and I was just having everybody sign it. And I remember Rancid was playing, and you were side stage, and I didn't dare go up, but I was like, kind of standing there with my guitar, and you looked over and you saw me, and I kind of waved at you, and you came down and you were like, "Hey man, what's with the guitar?" And I was like, "I'm having people sign it. Will you sign my guitar?" And you're like, "That's so cool. Of course." And like, you talked with me for a little bit, and that was like such a kind moment. And like, I had met other people that day who like barely wanted to give me the time of day, but like that meant so much to me, even as a kid and even today. And so I just wanted to say thank you for just
I appreciate that.
So
Thanks.
Kind.
Well, it means a lot. Thank you for saying, for remembering that moment from that long ago, and so much. I'm honored that that it had that impact, and you would bring it up today. Thanks.
Yeah,
and it makes me think there's a lot of artists that did that for me, and for me it was always just like, I think my mantra was always like, if I ever had some little band that somebody gave a shit about something I did, I would only hope and strive to be like those artists that did that for me. And like, now it's harder for me because after almost dying with COVID in 2020, I can't hang out. I don't feel comfortable doing it anymore because again, I still take precautions, but I am the guy that in spirit always loves doing that. I would be the person who would always sit at our merch table and sell stuff every night and do whatever and sign anything, take photos of anything. But like, I really do that because I love when artists do that for me. So thanks for saying that. I appreciate it.
Of course. And on that note, thank you again for
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. It's nice to talk music in the morning. And I noticed I saw that you did a Daytrotter session too. I always wanted to do one of those. We were going to once and it didn't line up with like timing ones, but that's really cool because as a nerd too, there were several of those that I always would like save them and download them. Yes. And I still have them on my iTunes because there were some sessions. Like I love that folk singer-songwriter, A.A. Bondi.
Oh my God, I love A.A. Bondi.
Such a great songwriter. It's like him and John Moreland are like two of my favorite like modern songwriters.
Yeah. I just got chills. Nobody knows.
Yeah, A.A. Bondi said one of those Daytrotter sessions where he's singing "When the Devil's Loose." I still listen to that version over the album version any day of the week.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, he's a great songwriter. You like a lot of the same stuff. So I was just gonna say that's really cool. You got to do that, and I was checking out some of your. And then Margot, I know because they were from Indiana, and they were kind of after I moved away. But I really went back recently. I never really listened to that band, but I somehow went down a rabbit hole on Bandcamp of some other artists that I think were on a label that led me to the Richard Charles Edwards albums.
Yeah.
And those albums are so fucking good.
They're so good. He's going to be on the pod too.
Oh, rad. Well, tell him I really think his solo albums are amazing because like again, because I didn't live in Indiana at the time and they blew up, I was always like, that's fucking awesome. Another good band from where I grew up. But then I think it was one of those things where like, I never went back and listened to them. So when I discovered these records recently, I didn't the correlation together
Yeah.
until I like looked for more music, and then I downloaded like everything. And I was like, God, he has a lot of releases. One and two, I'm like, oh, this is that guy that was the songwriter in Margot and the Nuclear So that was
Yeah.
cool. But yeah, really one of those artists I think that even now I think is writing, because I went back and listened to those albums. I'm like, those albums are good, but like
there's a progression.
Continue to get better,
Yeah,
like
they get better and better.
Yeah, and that's good, because I think if you go back and you find artists that like their older albums are better than what they're doing now, it's like, okay, cool, but like this is definitely one of those where it's the opposite. I think he definitely gained a fan, and he's been doing music for like 20 years prior to this at least. So fucking cool. Yeah.
So Slingshot to Heaven, the album I was telling you about, he kind of considers to be his first solo record.
Which one?
Slingshot to Heaven. So it's
I have that in here. I downloaded the director's cut from Bandcamp. Yeah, it's
that version is cool. I like the Margot version.
That's right. Yeah, but you probably heard that first, so you're like,
yes.
It's like the demoitis thing where like I have the ways I hear something because I've been listening to the demo forever, and then maybe somebody will hear the way I record it and be like, that's better than the demo. But it's like why I love that movie and book Juliet Naked, because it's like, you like that book and movie?
I haven't heard it.
Okay, you like High Fidelity, right?
Yeah.
Well, Nick Hornby, not About the Boy, I think was after High Fidelity, but this was like a few books later. He wrote this amazing book that you need to read, and the movie was fucking good too, because it's basically based on, it's very much got to be Paul Westerberg, but it's like this songwriter that kind of like went into obscurity, and it's in Minneapolis, is where where the guy's from, or where he plays his last show, and he disappears, and then all of a sudden the nerdy guy that's like us, I forgot the Scottish guy who plays him, but he's so fucking good. What's that guy's name? But it's cast great. The bass player of the Lemonheads directed it. Judd Apatow helped him fund it, based off of the Nick Hornby book. So you've got musician guy doing this book about musician guy who went into obscurity, that's like the Westerberg guy, that all of a sudden this music leaks that is called Juliet Naked, which is a stripped down version or demos of his famed album Juliet that nerds like us loved. And the one nerdy dude has a podcast dedicated to this guy, and he basically writes this review about how these demos are better than the record, where his wife just greatly disagrees with him, and she's already fed up with how his nerdism of being obsessed with the songwriter, and she just wants to have a kid. And so long story short, it from there, it just like turns into this really cool story of a parallel narrative. It's super sad and funny and cute. And to me, it was one of my all-time favorite books, and it's just as good as High Fidelity. And it's like made for people like us. So especially since you're from Minneapolis and love the Replacements, it's fucking incredible. But you could watch the movie and read the book, and they're both great. High Fidelity, I think I like the movie a little bit better because it's Chicago versus London. But and Cusack was great in that role. But anyway, Juliet Naked, you should check it out. Because what you said about Margot, that's where I got on this tangent, is that like, you're used to hearing this version, but it made me think of Juliet Naked, how he's just so like, the fucking demos are, they're so much better. And it's like the artist, has their interpretation. But for me, I just discovered this now, and I hadn't heard the original. So I went back and listened to the original, and like, I like this better. But
well, he would be thrilled to hear you say that.
That's cool. Yeah, I thought these versions of the songs really were really cool, and I tried to listen to the old version, but I think so
there's the new version of the album is really fantastic. There was a moment with a song called Flying Saucer Blues on the original. Where it's like, it's so stripped back, but it is like one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard. And it's like one of those moments where, I'm sure you have these too, like you remember the exact second you heard the song, and like it's like your world stops, it's just like,
I love that.
Like, oh, this is there was my life before this song, and now there's my life after it. It's kind of one of those.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that one, it's like in my list of, most perfect songs ever.
That's awesome.
Check it out.
That's I have those as well. And I think it's for sure, if there are those songs that like I'm so drawn to the feeling and the moment I was at in my life when I heard that song. Anything that I heard after another version of it, it might be a cool counterpart. But so yeah, for me, this is like, yeah, hearing that song now, I heard the other re-recorded version first. So yeah, totally different thing. So yeah,
sure.
But yeah, I have plenty of those songs that had that effect on me, and it's irreplaceable. And you know, where I'm the guy that I always love hearing like new interpretations of things, and I always search out like cool live sets so I can hear how songs have grown, because I sometimes I'll find newer versions of things or demos of things where like Thunder Road is one of my all-time favorite songs, the Springsteen song. And there's like a live version where it's mostly piano that's really amazing, and there's another live version from the 70s where it's like all acoustic and that are kind of like just electric in him, and then it kind of kicks in with the band later. That's so those things I listen to more than the original. But then there's, or like I really love a lot of people agreed, but some people, I really love the remix of the Tim album, the Replacements Tim.
Oh my God, it's incredible.
It was amazing.
I don't think I've seen, especially like, you know, knowing a lot of Twin Cities music curmudgeons, I don't think I've seen such like there's so many people who are purists about the Replacements, especially in Minneapolis. And I feel like it was just like a consensus that remix was like so good.
Only person I've had disagree with me was Bob, and I was really surprised. But yeah, because I think Ed Stasium, who did a lot of Ramones stuff, and was I think that originally like the how it goes or something is they mixed up. That was who they intended to have do the album, but then it was Tommy Eldery. That's how you say that. Yeah, it was the one who did it because they thought that he was the engineer, or he was actually So yeah, the remix was, I thought everything sounded like improved on, except there was like, I think Swing and Party, like I think I'm nitpicky, but I just like the snare drum on it. I thought it just bugged the shit out of me, so I can't listen to that version. It just sounds like a Tic Tac or something. But
sure.
But and that was one I was really felt needed most improvement. But I was also like, I think what they were battling with here is that if they made it thicker, than the kick drum just sounded way boomy and shitty, which that's what I heard when I was listening to them. Like, how are they gonna thin out the bottom end of the kick and also make the snare bigger? I don't know, but yeah, they didn't achieve. But I like Kiss Me on the Bus, like that album. Me and Bob did agree, like there were like bass parts in that song where it almost sounds like he's playing like a baritone, or like like a bass over a bass, and like it's like shit. It's really, really weird and cool how there's like parts in some of the songs where like I didn't even hear them in the original mixes, and there's so much more like oomph in some of those songs. Some are definitely stronger than others, but for me, I think that actually replaced my Tim version for a lot of the songs. And then I can't even say enough about like some of the deep cuts. Like I was familiar with some of those, but like there was one song that wasn't out anywhere, which is that song, I think, Having Fun. That, I don't know if you know that song, but that song, that's like just as good as like the A-sides on that album. And that song was great. And then there was, oh God, that song, there's like another B-side that was just like really great. It's like P.O. Box or something, like P.O. Box is waiting. I don't know. But Having Fun is like, is great. And then, hold on. I'm trying to think. This is like Having Fun.
I have it pulled up here, but I don't remember.
But Having Fun, I'm imagining the only reason they took that song off the album is like, it just seems like it's almost like very similar to Hold My Life, Bastards of Young chorus. It's just a very, I don't know. So maybe it just seems like it's similar enough to where maybe they felt like it was too similar, but I don't know. You probably never get an answer if you try. But, no. But I don't know. Maybe Spencer would answer you why they took it off the album. But I was like, man, this sounds like it is as good as the like key songs on that album, and it's got such a good hook of a chorus. And there was no version ever leaked, so it was probably just something they tracked. It was on the reels that never saw the light of day, which I'm sure we have a couple songs like that, but they're not as good as that fucking song. So that's like throwing away an A-side, but that is literally a metaphor for Paul and that band. It's like just like throwing away A-sides. It's like, why not? Just like, instead you put on like Waitress in the Sky or like something that's like a great song, but also like a great song for those that just love that band, not for the average listener. They're not going to be like, oh man, fucking Joseph Thunder and Waitress in the Sky, or like, or Lay It Down Clown. Those are the deep cuts that like I love after I exhausted every single song in their catalog. And then I went back. I'm like, okay, what songs have I missed that I deserve to listen, or that deserve a listen? But
yeah, for sure.
Anyway.
I mean, yeah, like when you're going, like if you're showing somebody a replacement song, like you're not going to be like, all right, well, here's Nighttime Jitters or something.
No,
like
no, you're not going to start with those songs. That's after they're hooked and they're yearning for more.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
It's like Queen or something. There's a lot of deep cuts that are great, but you're going to, first you're going to start with like, maybe you're not going to go with like the most known songs, but you're at least going to be like, all right, here's this song that is equally amazing, that is like not Can't Hardly Wait, but it's something, or not Bastards of Young, but maybe as good as those. But you know, there are like Hold My Life or something. You know?
Yeah, Kiss Me on the Bus is one of my favorites.
And that's a song I liked before, and I always loved putting it on mixtapes for a partner or whatever. But now with that new mix, I love that song because I feel that the bottom end made that song sound like a different song. That to me was like the high point in those remixes. It was just like, holy shit. Now that's the one thing me and Bob agree on with those remixes. Everything else, he was like, I think he said the kick drum sounds too fake, or it sounds too boomy or too clicky. He's like, it sounds like every like modern punk kick drum. I was just like, okay, Bob. He's smart. He knows better than me. So I'm like, all right, I trust you. But
I don't know. I like
we'll agree to disagree on this one thing.
Yeah, that's fine.
Anyway, but yeah, I won't take up more of your time. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
No, oh my gosh. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time.
And you're welcome. And
hopefully we're not strangers.
They're a musician's musician. They just don't play the hits. But when you know how the sausage is made, you know how good this stuff is. It should